record. Okay, welcome everybody to Discover the Next Great Apple. It's a fundraiser for the Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard. You can learn more about us at communityorchard.ca. And it is so lovely to have so many people participate in tonight's apple tasting. We are going to learn a lot about how apples are bred and developed. And there is so much more that goes into it than you'd think. You know, we all have know the story of the Macintosh apple. You know, was discovered, it was a seedling tree that was discovered here in Ontario. And I think his name was John Macintosh. He tasted the apple on this little seedling tree that was just on his farm. And he's like, this is a really good apple. And so he thought, well, maybe I can make my fortunes distributing and selling the apple. Well, what happened with John Macintosh is the first thing he tried to do was to sell the seeds and give them to friends. But when people planted those seeds, the tree didn't produce Macintosh apples or the same kind of apples. Because of genetic diversity, there were different kinds of apples. It was like a parent with children, right? All the children are different. So then he learned how to graft, and he grafted these Macintosh apple trees, and that has become one of the most popular apples in North America, and I don't know, maybe even the world. We'll learn more about that today. But you'd think it's easy. You discover an apple tree, and you somehow.
Are we on?
Oh,
No, we're not on.
Yes, you guys are on. Whoever you are, you're here and we can hear you. So maybe turn off your mics just temporarily. Thank you so much. Okay.
Susan,
so, yes, hi.
is it possible to mute all from your end?
Oh, great idea, Cliff. Let me see if I can.
In progress.
Let me see. It looks like I can, maybe. Maybe not. Admit. Yeah. Not sure. I should have looked into that. There must be mute all. Yes, mute all. I hope it's not going to mute me. Mute all current and new participants. Got it. Thank you, Cliff. And then I will turn people on when it's their time to speak. Okay. Can you guys still hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Excellent. Thank you very much, Cliff. Okay, so we talked about the Macintosh apple. So it's 7:03, and let's do a little housekeeping so you know what to expect for tonight's conversation. First, there is a poll I'm going to put on right now. I'm launching a poll for you guys to fill out. And I want to know how you learned about the event today. So if you can, while we chat, please vote in the poll. So first, there's a welcome from me. I'm going to just say a few quick words about Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard. And our wonderful MPP is here, and she's going to say a quick hello as well. She's Jill Andrew. We love her dearly. And many people found this conversation today, this event today, through Jill's list. So Jill has a lot of fans. So she will talk for a couple of minutes. Now, at 7:15 sharp, we are going to meet apple breeder Rachael LeBlanc. She's going to tell us her story and how she develops apples. We're also going to see a little video with her, a little bit more about her story. By 7:25, Dr. Amy Bowen is going to teach us about sensory science, how we taste apples and how experts taste apples to choose apples that are going to be great for people, for consumers. 7:35, we've got 6 new apple varieties to taste. None of them have been launched in the market. None of them even have names. So all of you have your apples nearby. They're all going to have numbers on them. Some of them look similar, so we'll use the numbers to identify which is which. We're going to taste these apples, and we're going to find out what flavors we can find in them. But here's where what you guys are doing is so important. We want your feedback. We're keeping mics off because our timing is tight. But we want you in the chat box. We want you guys to tell us the flavors you're getting, the impressions that you have of these apples and how you feel about them. So that's what's going to happen at 7:35. We have 6 apples to taste. We've got 5 minutes an apple. But I want to stress again, we want to hear from you. So if you're new to Zoom, to get to the chat, at the bottom of your screen, there's a bunch of icons and there will be one that says chat. And and that's where you're going to do the chat. So at 8:10, we will have a poll and we will vote for the next great apple. And I had a request from one of our volunteers, from Gail, who said, can we name the apple too? So Rachel, I'll put that out there for you. I don't know if you want some input from the Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard. Okay, and then the event will end at 8:15. So just to tell you all, this event is being recorded. So if you have your camera on, and we love it if you do, because we want to see how you're reacting towards the apples and if you have a smile on your face. But if you don't want yourself to be seen in the video version, then just turn off your camera. You all have your helpful printouts to evaluate the apples. And if you don't, there was a link on Zoom where you could get them. If anybody had a problem with that or can't find the link, put it in the chat box. I'll see if I can figure out how to put that in the chat. So submit your questions and flavor comments in the chat box. If you're having technical difficulties, please call or text Cliff at 416-436-0159. So enjoy tasting your apples tonight and have fun. Okay, so right. Just very quickly about our orchard. So I'm Susan Poisner. I'm the coordinator of the Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard. We are all volunteers, totally volunteer project. Our park and our orchard are in Midtown Toronto, opposite the Eglinton West subway station. And we meet up on weekends during the growing season to take care of the park's fruit trees and the pollinator gardens. The funds raised from tonight's event will help us to pay for fruit tree and gardening supplies like mulch, plants, traps, and more. And we are always looking for new volunteers. So if you want to join us, you can email us at growing4green@gmail.com. And please check out our website at communityorchard.ca, where we have been blogging since we planted our first fruit trees, and that was way back in 2009. So I am going to hand it over as soon as I can unmute her. I wonder if she can unmute herself. Jill.
I can. Hi,
Yay.
Susan. How are you?
Yes, great. Thank you so much for coming. What do you think of this picture? There you are with cherries.
It is absolutely adorable. And you've got me there with my better half, Aisha. And those cherries were the highlight of our summer because, quite frankly, those cherries ended up in pies that we baked, and they were shared with NAMI Res and a few other community organizations. So that was a very, very, very fun memory. I just want to take a couple minutes to say hello to everyone. Good to see you, especially the little ones. I see Sarah and Noah, I think, or at least Sarah and Noah's kitties are on the call. I want to say welcome to everyone and thank you for having me. Thank you to the Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard for always making me feel welcome and for being a valued member of the community. The things that you all do, the projects that you initiate are so vital to community engagement. They're a direct response to some of the food insecurity that we know we are dealing with in St. Paul's, particularly nearby to the area where the orchard is located. So I can't say enough about how on time, on point, and how necessary the work you're doing is. It's not only environmental stewardship, of course it is that, but it is also bringing people together. It's connecting one another. It's building new friendships. It's networking. It's being at one with nature, with soil, with fruits. And really it's also promoting a sense of community, a sense of giving, a sense of sharing. And when they say an apple a day keeps the doctor away, I can tell you that's pretty true. I saw my doctor a couple of weeks ago and she said, Jill, you might want to lay off of the peaches and the cherries because those are really high in sugar, but apples and berries are your best friends. So I'm going to be taking her advice certainly to heart. If I may just say, it's been a very busy week. As some of you may be aware, a very, very, very busy week. But I want to make it clear how important it is that we maintain and that we fight for our green spaces, even here in an urban space like St. Paul's, especially when we have a government that frankly doesn't quite respect green spaces or the green belt, if I can say that here, the way that we would hope that they would. So just know that in me, you've got a buddy, you've got a friend, you've got an ally, you've got someone who recognizes that our fight for climate justice is inextricably linked with every other fight that we are fighting now, whether it's one for housing affordability, whether it's one around fighting for social justice and ending anti-racism, whether it's the fight to end poverty, institutionalized and legislated poverty like the ODSP rates. I could go on and on and on, but climate justice, food security, being good stewards to our community, to our green spaces, advocating for families to be able to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, nutritious meals. This is all part of what each and every one of us here in St. Paul's is a part of. And I'm just really glad to be your MPP. So as always, reach out to me, reach out to my staff. I'll add my information into the chat if ever necessary. And I'm pretty accessible. I do a lot of my social media. I respond to many of my emails. Be persistent, please, because this is a very hectic time with education workers, with ATU. There are a lot of things that are happening in Ontario right now, but we are pretty reachable. So thank you. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to be here for a little while, not the entire time, sadly. I just learned that recently, but I will be here for as long as I possibly can, and then I'll graciously slip away. Thank you so much, Susan, and to the entire team.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Jill. We're always so happy to have you, and that's great. Yeah. And also I want to point out, thanks to everybody who's been chatting so far. So far, Rachel has uploaded the PDF. If anybody had trouble downloading the PDF document that we're going to use when we do our apple tasting. Sarah and Noah, those are the kids, I think. Sarah and Noah, they respond, they said, nope, we're Sarah and Noah. So just so you know, Kathy shared, hi guys. So Kathy shared, she's from Ward 14. She also volunteers with the Toronto Nature Stewards and the Temorden Mills Wildflower Preserve Stewards. Great to learn about a community orchard, says Kathy. She's also a member of the Toronto Field Naturalists. Wow. She says, I love apples. Looking forward to this. So that's great. So keep chatting in the chat box. Now, next up to bat, we have Rachel. So Rachel, do you want to say hi? And I'll just, while you say a quick hello, I'm going to sort out sharing our video.
Okay. Thanks, Susan. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our apple tasting. I'm really excited to be able to bring you some of Vineland's newest apples. These are, as Susan mentioned, brand new. They're unnamed. They're just numbered right now. And they're kind of going through our pipeline to figure out which ones we want to commercialize. So we're a few years away from you being able to buy them at the grocery store, but we wanted to provide them and get to you for this opportunity and get some feedback from you as well. So probably less than 500 people have tasted these apples up to this date. So I want you all to let us know, be honest too, what you think about the apples.
Okay, great. Sorry about a little interruption, a little bit of chaos around here. Okay, so I think you guys can see the video, can you not? Oh, you know what? I'm going to stop share, make sure the sound is on. Okay, so let's take 2 minutes because I was lucky enough to go and visit Rachel's orchard. So let's see what it all looks like. I want to make sure I am sharing, share sound. And if there is any problem with the sound, whoops, hang on, share, then please put in the chat box. Okay, so here we go. You guys can, I am sharing my screen. Yes, indeed. Okay, good. Teenage volunteers harvest apples at a research farm in Vineland, Ontario. These apples will be donated to the Niagara Christian Gleaners, a charity that will dehydrate the fruit and ship it to people in need around the world. Most commercial orchards grow just a limited number of apple varieties, focusing on profitable consumer favorites like Honeycrisp or Royal Gala. In order to do that, they use trees that have been propagated using age-old grafting techniques. But in this research orchard, there are more than 20,000 unique apple trees growing, and each tree was initially grown from a single genetically unique seed. So the fruit on every tree will be very different in shape, size, color, or flavor. Apple breeder Rachael LeBlanc's job is to ensure that all these trees will have one thing in common: great tasting fruit. She does molecular testing on the seedlings to ensure that they have characteristics that consumers will enjoy.
We're looking for apples that consumers want to buy. So crispy, juicy apples. Some people like sweet apples, some people like a little bit of a tartar apple. So we're looking for a wide variety depending on trying to satisfy the needs of all consumers.
Then it takes years to grow the seedling trees until they're mature enough to produce a harvest. At that point, Rachel's job is to identify the trees with attractive-looking fruit and taste it to decide which trees to continue to develop. From the tens of thousands of genetically different trees, only a few will get to the point where they can be introduced to the market.
Apple breeding is a very long-term effort. So an apple variety takes a minimum of 15 to 20 years in the development stage before it gets to the grocery store shelves. And 15 to 20 years is actually fast for an apple variety. Growers put a lot of work into producing apples as well. So when you go to the grocery store shelf and you see a bag of Honeycrisp, for example, and you think, wow, that's really expensive, you have to consider how much time went into developing that variety, and also that it could be really difficult to grow for a grower, which is why their cost is so high.
Despite the long and complicated process for developing new apple varieties, there is continued demand for new types of apples. Farmers, consumers, and apple breeders like Rachael LeBlanc all have a role in ensuring that the next generation of apples meets the demands of both consumers and growers. Thanks to their hard work and dedication, we can all enjoy the next great apple as it graces our grocery stores and farmers markets. Okay, so Rachael hadn't seen that yet. And at the time I was there, I said, Rachael, I think the sound might not be very good. I've got a new phone, and sorry about the sound, guys. That was hard, but I put some captions. But Rachael, I just wanted to ask you about you. So you're starting all these apples from a seed. Where are you getting the seeds from? Do you like eat a lot of apples and take the seeds out? Is that how you do it?
No, we actually decide which parents we want to cross together. So depending on what characteristics we're looking for, we decide which parents to use. So oftentimes it might be flavor, but we might also be trying to introduce some disease tolerance into a great tasting apple. So we'll take a great tasting apple and cross it with an apple that has some disease tolerance, and then we'll take the seeds from that cross. So in the spring, we have an army of people that go out with paintbrushes and pollen that we have collected from the flowers of apples. They take the pollen and paint it onto the flowers of the other tree that they want to cross together.
Wow. Okay. So you're talking about taking the pollen. So let's say theoretically you're using a Honeycrisp tree. You guys have in your orchard some Honeycrisp trees. You've got a bucket of pollen from Golden Delicious, and you're painting them on that Honeycrisp tree's flowers. That's what you do.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So now what happens next? Do you, the honey, like what happens next?
So next, we just let the fruit develop over the summer, the seeds develop and mature, we collect them in the fall, and then we take the seeds out of all the fruit and we store them in, they have to be stratified in the cold to mimic the winter. So we put them in cold for about 6 weeks, and then we take them out, plant them in soil, put them in the greenhouse. And this is at the stage where we'll do our molecular testing, as we were talking about in the video. So we'll go through and take a very small piece of leaf tissue from every single seedling, and we'll run whatever molecular markers are important for that cross. So if it's a cross that's targeting disease tolerance, then we'll look for the part of the DNA that confers that disease tolerance, and we'll only keep seedlings that have the tolerance. Anything that's susceptible will be removed. Same thing goes for flavor or the texture of the fruit. It's just a different marker that we use.
And what part, so when you're doing this testing, are you taking a leaf? How do you know what the DNA is?
We take a small piece of leaf tissue from every one of the seedlings.
Okay, so you take the leaf tissue and you're looking for certain qualities. So actually it'll say in your printout from your results, it'll say, this apple is going to be crispy and juicy. Is that what happens?
Well, these traits are not that simple. You know, it's not just one gene that controls it. So we can never say, okay, this is going to be the perfect apple, but it's enriching our population. So it's apples that have the best chance of having the best texture or have the best chance of having good flavor. We really are looking for flavor at removing the apples that don't produce the compounds that are known to provide good flavor.
So Rachel, if you didn't do the testing and you just took those seeds that you so carefully crossed and you planted out those seeds without sifting through and choosing this one and that one and whatever, what chance would we have of having tasty apples grow from those seeds?
There's a lot of genetic diversity in apples, so you would still find some apples that taste good and store well and all the other attributes, but you're going to have a lot more apples that don't meet the criteria that you are looking for.
Okay, so now we've got part one of the science, and I want to share on the call that I was in that orchard. I was wowed by even just the way the apples looked, the colors and the shapes and the sizes. Some of the apples were actually tiny little crabapple size. I guess, you couldn't predict that. Some were different sizes, beautiful, beautiful. But here's the thing. Rachel, you told me I could take any apple and I could eat it. And I did. They were all delicious. They were all sweet and crispy and yummy. And I thought, that would not happen if you had just planted out the seeds without filtering out the ones that you think, oh, that's got the mushy gene. I don't think we'll plant that one. This one's got the bitter gene. We'll keep that one out. But this one got some nice genes. Let's plant it and see what happens.
Yep, you're absolutely correct. In the beginning, we weren't using genetic markers, and we did have a lot more fruit that didn't meet those crispy, juicy, flavorful criteria.
So, okay, looking at the chat, I've got from Rachel, who wants to say hi on behalf of Not Far From the Tree. Lots of you got your apples in Not Far From the Tree bags, thanks to Rachel. And we've got a couple of other volunteers from that group, I think, on the line. And Jill says she puts up her contact details if anybody wants to talk to Jill Andrew, our MPP. Oh, and she says she's got to admit Honeycrisps are her favorite. Well, Jill, stay on the call long enough. You may have a new favorite because we are indeed going to discover the next great apple. Okay, Rachel. And Rachel puts the other Rachel, Not Far From the Tree. Rachel puts the Not Far From the Tree website in the chat. Okay, Rachael LeBlanc, we are going to now, shall we move on to Amy? I want Amy to talk about her part in this whole adventure. So Amy, can you unmute yourself and come on the line?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. It's always, I guess, this is my third year doing it, and it's always fun to talk to this group and sort of talk about what we do at Vineland and the work that we do on apples. So my role at Vineland is I work actually really closely with Rachel in identifying what makes a flavorful apple, what makes, defining a good texture and all of those types of things. So just got a couple slides I thought I would share with you based on some of the sensory and consumer research that we've done, and then a little bit on kind of what we'll be doing for the tasting today. And then we can get to what you're all waiting for, which is to cut into these apples and to get to try them. So we won't talk for too much longer. So just give me a sec here and I will share my screen.
You should be able to. I think we did it
Yep, I'm just
before.
getting
Yep. Oh,
myself
good.
organized
Good.
here.
Perfect.
Oh, except let me just bring it into presenter mode. Weird buttons are popping up. There we go. Can everybody see that? So in the video, and Rachel sort of talked about sort of some of the steps that she does. So what we've been doing is working with Rachel of when she selects the trees in the orchard and sort of wants to bring them into the lab, then we can evaluate them for different characteristics. So one of the things we do is we use our trained sensory panel that we have at Vineland. So they're members of the public that we've recruited to be part-time employees based on their sensory acuity, which essentially means how well they can taste different, tastes and flavors and how repeatable they are in saying that those tastes and flavors are there in the products. So they've created 18 different attributes that we evaluate apples for, and so that we can get a really good sort of understanding of what are the differences and similarities based on the apples that are coming out of our orchard, and also how they compare to the apples that you're buying at the grocery store, because that's ultimately our competition, right? We want to be able to have our apples on the grocery store shelf right next to those. So other things that we've been doing as well from this is once we understand the sensory profiles that consumers like, which we do through doing these consumer taste testing. So, similar to sort of, I guess, part of what we'll be doing tonight when we're taking the poll at the end is we take these apples to people and we get them to taste them and tell us how much they like or don't like them. And then based on those apples that they really like, we then try to figure out, based on what our trained panel did for those 18 attributes, what's defining liking. So what are the characteristics that we know are driving it? So Rachel had said in the video that like juicy and crisp are two things that everybody's looking for in apples. And that's some of the things that we found through doing this sort of sensory profiling and consumer research over the last 10 years on our apple program. But working with people is time consuming and can be very expensive from a research perspective. So we also are always trying to find instrumental ways to be able to relate what we perceive in our mouth and how that attributes to our liking or disliking to instrumental measures. So we do things like measure the sweetness or the acidity or the texture, and we've developed, kind of thresholds what we're looking for in our program that we can use to sort of screen apples through, so that again, we're enriching and bringing the best apples forward for profiling and for consumer evaluation. The other thing we know, though, is not everybody likes the same thing, which is just fine. And even tonight, we've got 6 apples, and I'd be surprised if everybody picked the same one as their favorite. So something else we do is we look at consumer clustering to identify drivers and tracks of liking based on taste preferences. So, what are the different descriptors people like? So you often hear people segmenting things based on, age, income, these things, but we actually do it based on what you like and don't like in apples to figure out who our market is to be able to put new apples out onto the market. So we've been breeding apples at Vineland since 2011, and we've been looking at the sensory and consumer appeal of these apples from the very beginning. And so that's part of the reason too, as Rachel said, that we've been able to sort of enrich what's in the field and why Susan was able to go around and taste so many good apples on Saturday. So one of the exciting things that we did was in last fall, we took 12 of our top apples, so double the amount that you see here, and we took them to taste tests in Toronto. We had 220 people evaluate these apples, and we were thrilled because what we found was that 11 of our apples were liked as much as Honeycrisp and more than Gala. And since Honeycrisp is a lot of people's favorites, just as Jill had mentioned on the chat there, we know we see that as positive sort of as we move through. But as I mentioned, we did find that not everybody liked the same thing. So we found kind of 4 groups of apple likers based on different sort of sensory profiles that the apples had. So we found our biggest group like apples with lots of sweetness, but not a lot of acidity. So they just want it to be sort of very sweet driven. But 26% like apples that are very crisp with juicy textures. So it's really about the texture of the apple for them, whereas the other group was really about the sweetness. Then we've got 19% that like apples that have a sweet acid balance with juicy and crisp. So they want everything in their apple. And then we have about 14% that, well, they're probably not our biggest apple consumers. And hopefully none of you feel this way about our apples tonight, but they just like apples that have sort of the mealiness or sort of really high acidity. And it's what they don't like in apples that dictates their preferences more than what they do like in apples. So they're sort of hard people to work with. So I thought I'd put this up here just for you to kind of think about maybe where do you think you sort of fit into in terms of, these different consumer groups, just from interest sake. So the next thing I thought I would do is just kind of take you through how we do a tasting. And I pulled up that tasting sheet. I just put it on this screen here, so we're all looking at the same thing. That was downloaded. Slightly different format because I just crunched it all on one slide. But I wanted to kind of just walk you through.
Sorry. Oh, I'm just going to interrupt. So everybody, just to make sure you guys all have your sheet. And yeah, okay. So we'll have a look at this together.
Yeah.
Aroma,
so your version
flavor,
of it will look more like this.
Yeah.
Be sort of 2 pages that looks like that.
Yeah, perfect.
So what we're going to do, I'm just going to kind of walk you through how we're going to use this sheet, and then we can get into, sort of going through the apples. But what you'll see is everybody will have on here is it talks about what are the different aromas. And so these are all taken from attributes that we use here at Vineland with our trained panel to evaluate all of our different apples on. So I said that we use 18. So what do we have here? About 8 of them that we're going to be looking at. So first thing we're going to do when we get started with the tasting is we're going to take our apples and we're going to cut them into wedges. So you usually, depending on the size of the apple, usually cut it into sort of 6 or 8 wedges. And then we evaluate each of the wedges. And first we want to smell them to see if there's aromas, that are coming through on the apple. And so common ones that we sort of look for are that overall apple intensity. So how appley is it, when you smell it? And so you might sort of taste an apple and, it gets, oh, let me go back a bit. It gets a rating somewhere on here from you think it's really low, maybe it's kind of in the middle, or it's really high. And we base this on apples you've tasted before. So just based on your kind of apple spectrum. Then evaluate maybe if it has honey flavors or floral notes, or maybe some apples have more kind of green herbaceous notes to them. So are you sort of picking up some of those characteristics? So then you go through and you taste it and you would just kind of mark it down. And so then
sorry, Amy. So yeah, just to tell everybody, so we will go through this all together in the first apple. And when we do the first apple, we'll keep this to hand and we'll go through one at a time. Okay, yeah. So we first got our aroma flavor. We've got overall apple intensity. We've got honey, floral, and green herbaceous. That's in the aroma flavor. So now taste. What are we going to get with taste?
So then now is when what most people think of when you think of tasting, which is eating the apple, but we always want to use your aroma first. So you're going to take the apple and you're going to bite it, and you're going to bite right through it. We want you to eat the skin and the flesh at the same time. And then think about, do you perceive sweetness or do you perceive acidity, as you're sort of chewing on this apple? And so acidity, one of the things you'll notice often is sometimes you start salivating and you'll feel it on kind of the sides of your, the sides of your tongue, the sides of your mouth, if it's something that's got a lot of acidity. But we'll go through and sort of look at that. And then we'll look at the texture as well. So is it crisp? Does it make a snapping sound, when you sort of bite into it? Is it juicy? Do you get a lot of sort of juice in your mouth as you're chewing it? And then we can see how this differentiates for the different apples. So how you can use this sheet as just kind of giving you an example. So all your apples are labeled like 1 to 6. So we could go through, and as you sort of taste it, you'll get your flavors and you can say, okay, I can see that my apple number 1, I just made up these because we're going to taste them together, is, in the medium high for overall apple intensity. It's pretty high for honey, pretty low for floral, and pretty low for sort of green herbaceous. Taste, it's very sweet, but not very acidic. And texture, it's in the kind of high end sort of for both of those. Then you can use the same tasting sheet for your second apple by just writing a number 2 where you evaluate it that way. And then at the end, you can see where all your apples kind of rank, and you'll be able to see which apple you thought was the sweetest or which one you thought had the most apple character, just to kind of use your sheet sort of going forward.
Okay, this is so exciting. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say, Amy?
Yeah, I was just saying the last thing we wanted to ask you about was, because Rachel and I are really curious if there's anything else in these apples that you perceive, because as we said, these are all new varieties. So what you could just do is just create a little like tasting notes on the side for each of the apples. So, you know, and just kind of write in what you thought of the apple, and you can share that with us in the chat, or share that with us, you know, at the end in terms of the discussion, but just a good way of then kind of keeping track of unique differences, or that maybe jumped out to you. What was distinct or differentiating for you for that apple?
Okay, perfect. So we've got a comment from Yanina. Yanina says, is there an example apple for evaluation? For instance, what's a really apple-y flavored apple? So in terms of, Amy, in terms of overall apple intensity, what kind of apple would be high?
So one that is often seen as very high in that overall apple intensity is like a Red Delicious.
Okay, all right, that's great. Okay, so let us start, shall we, with apple number 1. Everybody grab your apple number 1.
Yeah, and then the
And,
last.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to show one more
We keep
thing
jumping
before we
in.
bite into our apples.
Yeah.
Is that for a lot of people, it's hard to come up with terms. And so that's where Susan had provided this apple flavor wheel. And so this is here as a guide, not that you're expected to taste every single one of these things in an apple, but just to give you ideas of when somebody's talking about, when I talked about green, what does that mean? Well, it could be grass, it could be like herbal, you know, like basil or thyme, something like that. So this is here that was provided if you want to download and just look, just because sometimes it helps to us to be able to sort of name the different flavors that we're perceiving. So it's up to you if you want to use it or not, but I just wanted to share why we included it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So everybody is going to now get out apple number 1. Now, I know, Amy, from previous chats, that there is actually a fancy way to cut your apple to make it just right. So Sarah and Noah, I'm looking at you guys. Make sure that your folks cut them in the right way. So show us, Amy, what is the right way to cut an apple?
So the way we always cut the apples, because you want to be consistent and you want to have sort of equal sizes, is if you've got the stem, you know, at the top here, and then, you know, kind of the butt at the bottom, is you want to cut it through that, like right through the stem. So you want to go this way through the apple.
Okay, I'm showing my apple.
Okay.
Let's see your apples, guys. Show us your apples. Okay.
From there, I'll cut my apple, my half here. I'll cut it in half, and then each half in half. So I'll get 4 pieces out of this half.
Sorry, I should have turned off my mic. I'm hearing, you guys are probably hearing my chopping sounds. So
then
this
you
is
have
what my piece looks like.
Yep, that's perfect. And then most people don't like to eat the seeds and the core, and that takes away from liking. So we just make a little cut to cut those out so that your wedge is free of that. And then you have a nice clean wedge that's ready to be bitten into. But
Okay.
Smell it.
So don't bite yet. So the first thing we're going to do, guys, is have a sniff. And I remember from previous years that when you smell, you see like that aroma profile. So if you're looking at your sheet, do you get any apple intensity? Do you get any honey, any floral, any grain herbaceous? So in the chat box, I would love to see, before Amy tells us what we should be getting, I don't know if she's going to tell us what we should be getting. I want you guys to say, what do you get in terms of aroma? Are we allowed to then taste as well? Can we taste now too, Amy?
Yeah,
Okay,
so it's just because once people start tasting, then they forget to smell it. So that's why generally you smell first to get any of those aromas. And then you can make sort of note of those. And then you would go through and you'd bite through it.
Okay. So far, nothing in the chat box. First of all, crispy and juicy without question, in my opinion. Okay. Jill says juicy. Yes. Vicky says, I love this apple. I'd love to know, Vicky, what you love about it, if you can describe it. Here she is. So crunchy, juicy, and sweet. And that's what I like in apples too. Okay. But I'm looking for a flavor. So Vicky says it's totally balanced. If anything, maybe could I be getting a grassy flavor? I don't know. Nothing's jumping off the page for me for a specific flavor. Let's see. Jill says what Vicky said. Vicky says sweet. Okay, Giselle says pleasant slightly sweet, but plain. And Giselle, I'd agree with you because there's nothing specific that's coming forward for me. So taking another bite. Jack, I see you evaluating it. I'd love to know what you think. Oh, Beck and Ashley says, notes of green banana pear. Wow. Okay.
Yes. So I would say on this, sort of, I was going through it. I think, apple intensity, I probably put just above medium. It wasn't super strong. In terms of it, I got a lot of honey on it. So I would put this in sort of the higher range for honey. I have it kind of in the medium high. And then I get some floral notes, but the floral notes also kind of go into the herbaceous notes. And so where you said that sort of, banana pear, I can kind of, see where you're coming from, the green banana pear coming from there. So, sort of rating both of those in there. Totally agree with everybody. High sweet.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. And low acid, which is why the sweetness seems so dominant, in this apple, because it is got a lower acidity to it. So you're not getting that kind of puckeringness that's, balancing the sweetness, which a lot of people really like.
Okay. So now, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, so Sarah and Noah, both of them say best apple ever. Okay, interesting. Jack says not much in the way of aroma, but crisp and sweet. I agree with plain, but good plain. And Jack, also for me, when I tasted this, I thought, I bet you Honeycrisp is one of the parents. And I know Rachel won't tell us that. That's probably top secret. But I kind of feel it's very Honeycrispy. So that must be the honey flavor I'm getting. Vicky agrees with Sarah and Noah. Best apple ever. Okay. Yanina says sweet, but not overly. Aroma of unripe banana and grasses. That's Rini and Yanina both say that. Kate says pear with a little pomegranate, medium honey. Veronica says we tasted honey too. Andrew says very low acid. Sarah and Noah, they really like it. They say delicious. And Jill says tastes amazing. And since we haven't had dinner yet, that makes it 10 times better. So Jack is not getting honey. And Jill also agrees with me. It's very Honeycrispy. Okay, so that was number one. You went through, Amy, and gave it some ratings. I was too preoccupied to do so. Shall we do apple number two? Let's find it in my. Okay, for me, apple number two is a little bit smaller. Similar coloring to the first one. What's interesting is a lot of the apples you gave us today are, I don't know if it's called bicolor, red with a bit of yellow. So something's going on. Oh, there's an emergency alert on my phone. Okay, so that'll pass. But anyways, so I noticed the coloring is the same, but this one is a little bit smaller. So shall we chop it? Let's do our half cut. And do a nice slice.
Yep.
Okay. So again,
I was going to say, whenever you're ready, then you can go ahead and taste it and just sort of think about, sort of what it is that you're perceiving.
Right away, this has it's much more fragrant. Vicky says this one has an incredible aroma. I'm getting it right away. So Vicky, what kind of aroma? And I know what I'm getting pretty clearly. Should I say? I don't know. Should I say? Well, I'm going to say that I'm getting honey aroma and grassy. That's what I would say. Let's see what you guys are saying. Now, I haven't bitten in yet. I'm going to mute my mic for 1 minute. Okay. I like this. I like this because it's interesting. And is it a little tart? I don't know, but it's got something to it. Okay, so here we've got in our comments, Vicky says flowery aroma. Jill says, this is random, but I've got a pear aroma in there too. Okay. Vicky says it smells like a garden. Dan says, whoa, that one I prefer much more than the first. It is more interesting, isn't it, Dan? I just find the first was delicious, but it was like sweet and too Honeycrispy.
So
Yanina says, yes, pear. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
no, I was just gonna say, I think one of the differences is in the perception of it is the last one was all driven by sweet when you put it in your mouth. Very low acid. This one has that sweetness there, but then that acid kicks in, which kind of does gives you this burst, explosion in your mouth of flavors and everything coming out. And then you get the sort of salivation. So the flavors are sort of moving around in your mouth. They're going up to your senses, so you're perceiving them better. And so it's a different experience. And so some people love that, with having that sweet acid balance that they're looking for in apples. Whereas other people say, you know what, I prefer just that sweetness. So that's where everybody's different, and it's not right or wrong. It's just understanding what are the characteristics that drive your reaction of wow, or it's all right.
And also, wow, like I like the word burst. I would call this a sunburst apple, because you do get that burst of juicy, wonderful flavor. Let's see, we've got here, Jack is saying, whoops, everything's jumping around. Yes, more interesting than number one, not so sweet, but more flavor. Pear, maybe. Gail says, oh, Gail is getting a rose aroma, nice and tart. Okay, somebody else said tart, and everything is flying for me here. Okay, let's see. I hope I didn't miss any. So tart comes right at the end for me, says Jill. Vicky says crunchy, juicy. Everybody's saying pear. A lot of people agree with pear, but also a bit green like celery. Huh. Dan says, I get a lot of tartness. I assume the acidity is responsible for that tartness.
Yes.
Okay, good. Lynn says, I am not getting aroma, but it's nice and crispy and juicy. And that's the other thing. Lynn's point, it is juicier than the first one, I find. Adina says, I love it crispy and not too sweet. Rebecca says, very acidic, but also juicy. Adina says, better than the first one. I think we all like this better than the first one. Somebody's just coming in, Rachel. Let's see. Yanina says, so good. We love the sweet tart. Also some rose. Oh, I have to have another bite. Is there rose in there? Sarah says it tastes like cold hard cider. Jack says, I agree with some tartness, but still sweet enough. And Leo says, nice balance of sweet and tart. Guys, I have to do this. I have to look for the rose flavor. I once had
move on to apple number 3,
Oh.
or we're going to run out of time.
Okay. Okay. Onwards to apple number 3. I think we all enjoyed this one.
I've got it right here.
Okay. Apple number 3. I seem to be missing. Oh, no, it's right here. Okay. Apple number 3, guys, do your cuts. Show us your pieces when you're ready. Man, this is so fun. I could do this for 3 hours. Forget 1 hour and 15 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay. Apple number 3. I've got my slice. And I will say right away, the smell is not remarkable. Not like number 2. I'm getting a little old socks smell. I don't know. That's what I'm getting, but not very much of old sock smell. I don't know if that's good or bad. Wow. Okay. Juicy for sure. I'm not sure what flavor I'm getting. Let's see what people say. Okay, Veronica's saying grass smell. Dan likes the aroma of this one. I'm not getting anything. Maybe it's just my apple. Definitely sweet. Is there honey in there? Okay. Abraham
The honey's
says
lower than some of the other ones. What I get, and I think where some of that sock smell is coming from, is the tropical fruit, which sometimes has a bit of that kind of earthy undertone to it.
Oh, okay. Abraham says
Papaya,
pungent.
mango, those types of things.
Okay, let's see if there's a mango bit in there. Okay, we're getting a couple of people saying grass. Acidic, Giselle says, acidic and dry texture to me. I like the tartness, says Giselle. Okay, Rachel says, this apple makes me think of what is available in winter. Okay, Jill likes a burst of taste, and I also agree. This one also has a burst. Gail says tastes like pear magic marker. Wow, magic marker. That's cool. We've got Ian saying it's a strong flavor. Vicky says low aroma, crunchy pineapple, perhaps. Okay, Dan is getting herbaceous flavors in this third one. Rebecca says musty, and maybe that's what I was commenting on. Andrew's got pineapple. Jack says no aroma at all, but quiet, subtle flavor, Swedish. Lynn says weird smell, juicy, crisp, and a bit of pear. And Kate says it's really pineapple-like. You know what? Tasting it again, I get the pineapple, and I like it more now because of the pineapple. Now, remember, everybody, at the end, we're going to have to rate these. You've had, just keep in your head, you've had 3 so far. Which is your favorite? Okay, so any other comments? Shall we go on to the next one? What do you think, Amy? Next one? Amy's going on. She's leaving us behind. Okay, she's leaving us in the dust here. Okay.
No, I'm a clock watcher. That's what I am.
Oh, you are a clock watcher. Okay. Okay, so we're going for number 4. Number 4 is the green apple. And Cliff, if you want to come downstairs, if to get a piece for Annie. Annie is tasting. Okay. So here's our beautiful.
So if we were tasting this in the lab, we would hide the color of the skin, because the color of the skin will often lead people to think how the apple should taste. So if you give people a red apple and a green apple, which apple do you think most people choose as the sweeter one?
Well, Jill's comment reflects on what you just said, because she says, I'm assuming by the looks of it that this one will be acidic.
Yeah, and so that's not always the case, right? And so it sort of comes from, because you think of Granny Smith, which is a green apple that's quite tart, but doesn't mean all green apples are tart. So that's often why when we'll do evaluations to get the real properties is we'll hide that visual cue that can lead you to your taste astray, I guess is the best way of putting it.
So here's a comment from Leo. Again, nice, but nothing outstanding. Not like the first time you taste a Honeycrisp and compare mentally to, say, Max. Rachel said, oh, I switched my apples. I think number 4 is more wintry. Number 3 has strong pear notes. Wow. Veronica says pumpkin smell. And Vicky agrees with Leo on his rating. Gail says this is her least favorite.
So this is the least crisp of all the apples we've had
Yeah.
so far. And we know that that is a big driver of liking for a lot of people.
And that's what Carly is saying. Less crisp, less texture, more overall herb and fruit flavor. But I am enjoying it. It is more grainy, but like yummy. If I was eating this in the orchard, like yummy. I'm sorry, I really enjoy it. Oh, Jill does not like this one. Adina says not much smell. M says not as crisp, a bit bland. And Dan says low sweet, low tart, somewhat herbaceous, softer texture, medium juicy, honey notes, low apple intensity. Yeah, we haven't been thinking about that apple intensity too much. Vicky says definitely not my fave compared to 1, 2, and 3. And Sarah and Noah, our youngest testers, say not great.
So this apple is sort of, as people described it, it's kind of middle of the road in terms of the sensory attributes, right? It's not really high or really low in anything. It's just got a little bit of everything. So it seems this group like something that kind of shocks your senses and makes you like kind of stand up and notice in terms of whether it's high sweetness or high crispness or, the high, that acid sweet balance. So
can I say something? I would be terrible on one of your panels because I get stuck on these apples and I want to keep tasting them to get more out of it. And you guys would hate me. You would throw me off the panel because I want to linger, but I'm quite enjoying this one. Okay, let's go shall we, to number 5. Number 5. Okay, we're going to do our cut. And Cliff and Annie, come down if you want to get an apple slice. Okay. Again, not a super strong smell. And by the way, Liza said for the last one, meadow and crisp. Oh. Mm. Mm. Oh my gosh. Mm. Okay. Vicky says it smells like vanilla, but I bite in definitely crisp and juicy. Oh, a good question from Yanina. What's a good palate cleanser for apples? Amy,
We
should
use
we be
water,
just water? Okay.
water and unsalted crackers.
Okay, so Rachel says number 5 looks tall and slender. I wouldn't pick it out of a crowd. Haven't tasted it yet. And I think that's a really fair, a good thing to say, because people buy with their eyes as well. And these apples are, really nice, but none of them are super outstanding in the way they look. Whereas when I was in the orchard, there were a lot of interesting looking apples. Okay, Vicky says tastes like vanilla. Dan says I like the shape of number 4. Jill says yes to vanilla, not my favorite, but for some reason I immediately thought of baking with this one.
Probably the
Is that-
vanilla note.
Oh, maybe. I mean, is that a consideration, Amy, for you guys when you do these tastings? Do you care if they're bakeable or not?
It's not something we look at. Our focus is for the fresh market, so like fresh apples, but it's definitely something that, could be a consideration down the road, or, people sort of might look at. But, our focus is on the fresh eating apple. So that's where we are right now.
Abraham says it's a unique taste, not like an apple. And again, we haven't been finding much of the green herbaceous, the honey. Is there? I think there's honey in this one. This one
I would
feels
say this is very high in honey and floral,
a floral. Interesting.
but like a sweet floral, like a vanilla, or, that type of place is where I would go with it.
I'd love to know if anybody else is getting that floral taste. Lynn says it's okay. Not very juicy, wouldn't seek it out. Jack says my number 5 was pleasantly barrel shaped. Not much of aroma for me, but Sherry says my smeller is no good. Okay, Liza says crisp and tart, quite subtle. And so Jill doesn't get the honey at all. Yeah, I want to say, Amy, last year when we did the heirloom apples, we got a lot of different flavors because it seems like they weren't as interested as consumers today are in that honey, very sweet taste. So I think these ones are kind of similar. Okay, Gail says tastes like wine. Rachel says, I taste honey, but I don't love this one. Rachel says, we thought number 5 tasted like cheese. Ha! And Kathy said low acid, smooth, not as juicy as the others. Okay, so I think it's time, isn't it? Texture feels denser, says Rachel. My number 6 is a big apple. This is a nice big apple. Does everybody have a really big one, or is it just me? Okay, you guys, yeah, pretty big. Okay, let's go for number 6. Man, I can't wait to finish eating all of these. All right, doing my half cut and cutting a little slice. Okay, ready. Okay, so for me, I'm getting more of an apple aroma, at least in this one. So Leo says, nice try, but again, not a Honeycrisp winner that grabs you the first time you try it. And for me, switched from a lifetime of grannies, though I still crave the tartness of a good granny once in a while. Dan says 6, I'm getting a lemony flavor. And Veronica says she gets a sour smell. Wow. Oh yeah, lemon. Good call, Dan. Oh, Liza says very floral and syrup-like. Okay, Jill says this one is refreshing. I don't mind it at all, but it doesn't compare to number 1 and number 2 for me. Vicky says very juicy. And Jack says, yes, less variation with the heritage apples. He remembers tasting the heritage apples. So he, The heritage apples, I wouldn't want to stuff my face with them. I find it really interesting to taste them, but I wouldn't like say, oh, I just want to keep eating them. These ones I could just eat a lot of. Okay.
And that's what we're
Adonis-
going for, is ones you can
Yeah.
eat a lot of.
Exactly. You know what people want, and you want to give them what they want, because that's the only way that you can make it economical to spend all this money to invest in an apple. So here, Adonis says, for me, number 2 gets her vote. That's her favorite. Rachel says hints of brown sugar. That makes sense to me. Sarah says good, not my fave. Jack says good flavor in number 6, not too sweet. I agree. Again, no aroma for me. Sigh. And Dan says the heritage apples also had a wider variety of textures. These ones are all very similar in texture, and that makes total sense because people like crispy juicy, and these are all
Yep.
crispy juicy.
Yeah, those are things that we are looking for, is crispy juicy first, and then looking at those sort of different flavor profiles later. But in terms of picking out different things, we have found all sorts of different things in our apples, like different flavors, like anise, like the black licorice, or some real tropical fruit notes, or some other kind of like musty types of things. And so we're still figuring out how people react to those. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? As well as the impact of the appearance of the apple and how much that influences, people's willingness to try it.
So guys, we have another minute or two. We're on apple number 6. I want to go back to our tasting handout. For apple number 6, what would you say in terms of overall apple intensity? Low, medium, or high? Put it in the chat box.
I would also say, getting ready for the polls, go back and taste through the apples, and do they taste the same now as they did the first time you tried it? Because there is often a presentation order effect, or sort of first time trying it effect, that can come into play. And so it's always good to sort of just go back through and taste through them and see if number 1 and 2 still taste as good now as they did the first time you tried them.
Okay, Veronica said medium with the apple intensity. Giselle said medium. MPP Jill is saying good night. She has to go to another Zoom call. Thank you, Jill. We're so happy you were here with us. Okay, so loving this. Okay, I won't go through
the acid
because
is what's really defining this one. There's a lot of acid on it.
Thank you. So you would put that as high,
Yeah.
because something we haven't had the time to do is really evaluate on your scale, low to high. Okay. We've got a couple more minutes, taste through, and I am going to get ready to put the poll up. Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll. Take your time, taste through if you need to retaste, and I'm going to go back to taste the first couple. I have to find the stickers. But yeah, like if we had more time, we would spend a little more time thinking, okay, where is it on that scale? Yeah, the acid, yeah. Okay, people are already voting. I want to find number 2 again. Where's that sticker? There's number 1. I'm going to try number 1 again. I want to know what the kids are voting for with their favorite. Actually, number 1 is better than I remembered it. Let's try number 2. All right. Can't find my sticker on number 2. I'll just have to eat all the apples tonight and just find it one by one. Just consume all of them. Okay, so far, I'm not going to end the poll yet. Let's see how many people have voted, if I can find out. So far, 26 people of the 33 of us on the line have voted. So I'm going to wait another minute or two. If you haven't voted yet, please do. It looks like as the host, I am not allowed to vote. Interesting. So 93%. I've got 2 more people left to vote. And I'm going to randomly eat a piece of apple. This is an old socks apple. I don't know which one it is, but I've got the old socks again. Okay, a few more comments before I close the vote. Let's see. We've got John joining us. All right. Oh, in the family, Kate writes, we had 2 votes for 2 and 1 for 5. So the parents voted for 2 and the kid voted for 5. Interesting. M says number 6 is also great. Adina started off, she's ranked all of them. So she goes 2, 1, 3, 4, 6, 5. 5 is her least favorite. Kathy says comparing 2, 3, and 5 is very interesting. I wish I put them in a different plate. I've lost track. Dan thinks old socks is funny, but I'm telling you, this really does taste like old socks. And Jack says, tonight I'm starting a bunch of apple cider vinegar. Yeah, I'd love to know, what's everybody going to do with the bits of apple? Will you eat them raw? Will you cook with them? That I'd love to know. Lynn says if I could vote for 2 of them, it would be number 2 and number 6. So Yanina has her rankings. Anne Marie says 2 and 6 are her faves. Sarah said, this is of the kids. Sarah says 1, Noah says 2, Mom says 3. And Anne Marie's going to make apple crisp with the rest of the apples. And Veronica's like me, eat raw, maybe grab some peanut butter and cheese to go with it. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll and show you guys the results. Let's see if you're surprised. It looks like, share the results. So you can see the results. Apple number 1 got 13% of us. Apple number 2 got 73%. Apple number 3 got 3%. Apple number 4 got 0%. Sorry, apple number 4. Number 5 got 3%, and number 6 got 7%. Oh, goodness. Seriously? Adina said she ate all the apples already. I don't believe that. That's impossible. That's a lot of apple. Okay, Kathy says comparing 2 and 5, I found 5 sweeter. Yeah, Yanina said, poor number 4. I wonder if apple number 4 is going to feel sad. I hope not, because apple number 4 is also lovely. It just didn't hit the top. Okay.
It had the softest texture, so we're on the right track as we're selecting our apples.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, guys, feel free. If anybody has any questions, we've got a couple more minutes. Ask your questions to Rachel and Amy. I'd love you to turn on your mics to say hello and just to tell us what you think. Let's see if anybody.
I have a question. So I can't remember the apple orchard that I went to last year, but I remember selecting an apple and posting on Facebook that how much I liked that apple. And she says, she replied, the apple orchard lady said, she replied back on that Facebook post saying, yeah, we just found this variety at a seed conference. And this was new for us. So glad you liked it. And I never really heard of these seed conferences and how people who have apple orchards, how they figure out what they're growing. Can you shed some light on seed conferences for me? Anybody?
I'm not really familiar with those either.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
And we also have a question from Cliff who put up his hand. Cliff, what's your question?
Hi, Susan, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was lucky enough to go with Susan when Rachel gave the tour. It was an amazing tour. Thank you very much. We also learned that apples are being bred, I guess, for more sweetness because that's what the market wants. But my question is, would it get to a point where people get tired of the sweetness and it goes the other way? Like, do you see this as cyclical or it's just the way things are going?
Well, I think it can get to a point where it's too sweet because if it's dominated by just one thing, then it loses its interest, right? Because it loses that sort of multidimensional component to it. And so I think what you'll find is that the range of sweetness is going to depend on the individual. And so it's not going to be like, there's always going to be people that like tartar apples. There's always going to be like people that like really, really sweet apples. What is going to change in that continuum is where the percentage leads. And so what we found in sort of doing this work over the past, sort of 10, 11 years is that everybody's looking for juicy, crisp, and sweet. But once you get juicy, crisp, and sweet, then things start separating out where people are looking for more of that sweet acid balance, or people are looking for more of the texture or more of the flavors sort of that come through. So it's like there's these kind of core baseline that the apple has to have. And then after that, but I would say it's never absolutes, it's a continuum.
That's a great question. Kathy also has a question. Kathy, can you put on your mic?
Yeah, I actually also wrote it down. Like, what would you do if, how important is appearance? Because what if you had a really great apple, it just doesn't look, symmetrical, or it doesn't have a nice color? Would you actually try to breed it and change the look?
I'll let Rachel go first and then I can weigh in.
Yeah. Typically I'm trying not to select apples that don't have a nice appearance. So I probably wouldn't breed with it. I probably wouldn't select it in the first place if it had a really ugly, but if it was super ugly but had an amazing flavor, then I don't know. It hasn't happened yet, but it would be a decision I'd probably talk to Amy and ask her what she thought.
So
Or do you think it's already been bred out of the stuff in your orchard, like, because it's always been weeded out?
I think ugliness is defined by the product, right? And so that's where marketing and other things come into play of being able to manage it. Also, once you've selected your variety, if it's got these perfect characteristics from like flavor, taste, and everything else that we're looking for, disease-resistant storage, there's ways you can grow it to maybe make it look prettier. And the other thing you can do is you can market it based on its attributes. That could be its differentiator on the market of how it sticks out at the store. So everybody loves Honeycrisp, but most people can't pick it out blind if it doesn't have the sign Honeycrisp underneath it, because it actually isn't, except for often being like really big, it isn't sort of a distinguishing apple. So that could actually be a benefit if it tasted amazing. So we know if an ugly apple tastes bad, it's never going to go anywhere. But if an ugly apple tastes amazing, well, then it could have a long life.
That's great. Now, Leo, who happens to live in an aquarium, right, Leo? There's a bunch of fishes behind you. So, Leo, tell us what your question is. Can you turn on your mic?
Well, I commented on the gene pool because, we all know that apples were grown in Ontario since the Loyalists arrived, or maybe even before that. And there was plenty of time for natural variability to happen over the roughly 150 years before people started actually artificially crossing them and so forth. I say earnestly, they did it in the old days too. So, and living in Metro for 44 years and traveling around Southern Ontario, I've always been struck by, once in a while you come across a survivor, a little apple tree that was part of, obviously, of somebody's farm orchard or something like that. And it can be sometimes in the middle of like an urban space. And some of those old apples are absolutely delicious, but they're not what you would expect in the store today, because the apples you see in the store today are bred for crispness so they don't bruise. And they're bred for taste, which tends towards the sweeter part of the spectrum, because not too many people really like a really tart apple. But that's what I grew up with, stealing crab apples from people's trees in Saskatchewan. So I'm biased towards the very crisp and very tart end of the spectrum. And I think what people called apples in the old days was very different from what we see in the store today. So one really good taste experience I had, as I put in the chat, is about a year ago, I was in Upper Canada Village. And hey, there was an old apple tree which someone had planted there, and it was obviously an old tree. And I don't know what the variety was. There was no sign or anything, and I'd never seen it before. It was a small, red, firm apple, sort of darkish red. But man, was that ever delicious. It was really outstanding. So I think probably the Vineland growers part of what they do may be always on the lookout for another Macintosh find. There it is in the wild. So what I feel here is everything is what you said. It's sort of all going to the middle of the road. Yeah, it's crispy. Yeah, it's nice and firm. It's not mealy. It's juicy. It's got some sort of tart, sweet balance. You know, it's either sweeter or tartar, but they're all kind of in the, they've got the middle of the road, but then how do you get that extra unexpected combination, which gives you the winner? And then the green herbaceous thing, I didn't taste that at all. I gave them all a really low green herbaceous. Floral, I didn't sense that, but that's purely idiosyncratic, right? Everyone's taste is different.
Well,
I was kind of struck how they all kind of in the middle of the road, and the only one that really stood out for me, I thought it was number 2 until I got to number 6. But when I got to number 6, I thought, you know, this has got, there's some extra zing in number 6. And that's all.
Okay. Oh, so let's get Amy, let's get your comment on that. I'd love to hear Yanina and Rini have a comment, and then we can wrap up.
yeah.
So,
So
what's your feedback?
I would say that when it comes to apples or any variety that you can, develop new cultivars are, that there's a wide range of flavor profiles out there, but there's also a lot of other things that come with sort of flavor that we can't always be selecting for. And that when we're selecting, for a commercial breeding program for the fresh market, like we're doing at Vineland, we're selecting for a lot of different characteristics that are in there, and we can never compare to that gorgeous heritage variety that you found, that's been preserved, or that you find, in someone's yard that's there. Because it might be amazing when you pick it, but in 2 weeks it's soft and mealy, and so it doesn't store well, so it'll never make it through the season, and so people won't get to try it. In the very first year we did sensory and consumer research on this, we tried 80 different varieties, and 40 of them were from the heritage heirloom sort of type varieties that at one point were commercial in Canada, but are no longer for some reason, not related to flavor, but related to something else that made them not a good apple, because an apple for us needs to store for 8 to 10 months, for it to be sort of considered. And so there's a lot of things that sort of come into play. So we are very upfront about the fact that there's going to be better tasting apples out there if you're, if you're a connoisseur of apple flavors, like the group of you are, and if you, have a lot of chance to try a lot of heritage, heirloom, cider, baking, there's all these different flavor profiles in there. And so we've carved out, one piece of the pie that we're really focusing in on, and kind of trying to maximize the flavor profile that we can get with storability, disease resistance, production quality, shipping ability, all of these other things that will make it a profitable apple.
Okay, so quick comment, Rini and Yanina, or one of you guys.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks, Amy and Rachel. That was fantastic. I guess my question sort of relates to what you're just mentioning, Amy, because speaking with cider makers, the kinds of cider apples that people want are sort of like high in tannins, not very tasty for the fresh market, like the ones we were trying today. And I was wondering if that is sort of part of apple breeding, or if sort of like cider apples are sort of more like smaller scale and like up to individual cideries, or what that sort of looks like in Ontario right now.
So I would say, like, I can sort of say from my perspective, and Rachel can weigh in from more of the orchard perspective, but we did do some work at Vineland a few years ago around cider apples. And yes, they have completely different qualities as what we're looking for in fresh market. You want as high as acid, you want the tannin profile, you want thick skins, you want, bitterness, all of these things that give that texture to it and the flavors to those ciders. And the other thing too is cider evaluation is usually done not on the fruit, but on like what you ferment. And so they don't evaluate the fresh fruit as much as they evaluate the different batches that they make out of it, and then the sensory qualities that come from that, and then sort of, those tannin levels. So there are cider breeding programs in the world where they're focused 100% on cider apples. But it's not something that we're doing here in Ontario. I know there is some interest from the cider industry around that. And in BC and in Washington, they do have some nurseries that do have, are bringing in new cider varieties, but France is one of the bigger breeding programs for cider varieties at this time. Rachel, I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I just want to say it's 8:19. We're a couple minutes over. But I want to take a moment to thank Rachel and Amy for the amazing work that you do. Having seen that orchard and how much work is put into all these varieties. And here's the hard part, everybody. I go to this orchard with 20,000 trees, all with delicious fruit, and all these trees will have to come down at some point and be replaced by more trees. So this is a lot of work. This is a lot of development. And I just want to say from all of us, we so appreciate that the work that you're doing. And like you said, I know the sound was terrible in the video, but like you said, next time we taste a Honeycrisp or any of the other big apples, we'll realize how much work went into making it so yummy. So thanks. Is there any last comments from anybody else before we all say goodbye for the evening?
I just want to say thanks everybody for coming and trying our apples, and giving us some feedback, and that for the most part, it was very positive.
It was. Everybody is clapping for you. And thank you so much to both of you. This has been really fun to organize. So we're going to say goodbye from now. Everybody is saying thank you in the chat. Oh my gosh, there's so much nice feedback. Dan says, I'm in humble awe of the food system and its ability to ensure ripe, fresh fruit in grocery stores year round. Anyways, thank you so much. I can't wait to look at more comments. Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
And thanks for your support for the orchard. If you want to learn more, send us an email, growingforgreen@gmail.com. Night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Susan, do you need me to stay on at all, or am I good?
You are awesome. Thank you. We'll talk in the next couple of days and I'll share the video with you when it's up, because some people are missing it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much.
to
Have a
you
great
and
night.
Rachel. Bye. See ya. Bye-bye.